Children, the plan is Street Fighter 6 and Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It's gonna be live.
In a world where chaos reigns and connection seem fleeting, one visionary endeavor seeks to bring us all together, then create a live after dark. Harnessing the transformative power of artificial intelligence, the timeless charm of radio theater, the wisdom of books, and the excitement of video games. Zoom Theater Live After Dark illuminates the path to enlightenment and fosters a sense of unity among its audience. Through this unique fusion of storytelling and interactive experiences, we aim to nurture personal growth, improve learning, and inspire a peaceful existence. Guided by your obedient servant, Sebastian Saint Serapian Smalls, we embark on a journey of self-discovery. But where do we begin? Begin by simply listening, slow down, see just how peaceful today can be. Together, we shall create a harmonious community, bound by shared passions and a desire to elevate the human experience. Sebastian Saint Serapian Smalls will be there, to the end of the line, my Valentine, guiding you on this journey towards a more serene and enlightened tomorrow. Catch you guys on the flip side.
Begin by simply listening. Slow down. See just how peaceful today can be. Greetings, children. It is I, your obedient servant, Sebastian Smalls. The plan for this one is listening to Moby Dick by Herman Melville and Street Fighter 6 because I need the practice. Yeah. Street Fighter 6, Herman Melville. Wish us luck.
Reagan, and I'm going to be reading from Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Moby-Dick. Chapter 1. New Memes. Call me Ishmael. Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. Then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, sometime or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. There now is your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves as Indian isles by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it in her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mole is washed by waves and cooled by breezes, which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water gazers there. Footnote, the Roman statesman Cato the Younger, 95 to 46 BC, killed himself rather than submit to Caesar. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. Go from Corlear's Hook to Coenties Slip, and from hence by Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posed like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reveries, some leaning against the spiles, some seated upon their pier heads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging as if striving to get to a still better seaward peep. But these are all landsmen of weekdays pent up in lath and plaster, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clenched to desks. How then is this? Are the green fields gone? What do they hear? But look, here comes more crowds, pacing straight for the water and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange. Nothing will content them but the extremists' limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No, they must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues, inlanders all. They come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles and of the compass of all those ships attract them hither? Once more, say, you are in the country, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in the dale, and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged in his deepest reveries. Stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment, if your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor. As everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. But here is an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in all the valley of the Saco. What is the chief element he employs? There stands his trees, each with a hollow trunk as if a hermit and a crucifix were within, and here sleeps his meadow, and there sleep his cattle, and up from yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep into the distant woodlands winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. But though the picture lies thus tranced, and though this pine tree shakes down its sighs like leaves upon this shepherd's head, yet all were vain unless the shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, for when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee deep among tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water. There is not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel 1,000 miles to see it? Why did the poor poet Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving 2 handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or other crazy to go to sea? Why, upon your first voyage as a passenger, did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration when first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land? Why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity and own brother of Jove? Surely all this is not without meaning. but and still deeper the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes and begin to be overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean it to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger, you must need to have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep of nights, do not enjoy themselves much, as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger, nor, though I am something of a salt, do I ever go to sea as a commodore or a captain or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. It is quite as much as I can do to take care of myself without taking care of ships, barges, brigs, schooners, and whatnot. And as for going as cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that, the cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancy boiling fowls. Though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and judgmatically salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverentially, of a broiled fowl than I will. It is out of the idolatrous doings of the old Egyptians upon boiled ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in their huge bakehouses and pyramids. No, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some and make me jump from spar to spar like a grasshopper in a May meadow. And at first, this sort of thing is unpleasant enough. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you become of an old established family in the land, the Van Rensselaers or Randolphs or Hardicanuts. And more than all, if just previous to putting your hand into that tar pot you have been wording it as a country schoolmaster, making the tallest boys stand in awe of you. The transition is a key one, I assure you, from a schoolmaster to a sailor. It requires a strong decoction of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. But even this was often time. But of it, if some old hunks of a sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks, what does that indignity amount to? Weighed, I mean, in the scale of the New Testament. Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything the less of me because I promptly and respectfully obeyed that old hunks in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else is one way or other served in much the same way, either in a physical or metaphysical point of view, that is, and so the universal thump is passed round and all hands should rub each other's shoulders, blades, and be content. Again, I always go to the sea as a sailor because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay, and there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid. The act of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchard thieves entailed upon us, but being paid, what will compare with it? The urbane activity with which a man receives money is really marvelous, considering that we so earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. Finally, I always go to sea as a sailor, but because of the wholesome exercise and pure air of the forecastle deck. As in this world, headwinds are far more prevalent than winds from astern, That is, if you never violate the Pythagorean maxim. So for the most part, the Commodore on the quarterdeck gets his atmosphere at second hand from the sailors on the forecastle. He thinks he breathes at first, but not so. In much the same way do the commonalty lead their leaders in many other things at the same time that the leaders little suspected. But wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me and secretly dogs me and influences me in some unaccountable way, he can better answer than anyone else. And doubtless my going on this whaling voyage formed part of the grand program of Providence that was drawn up a long time ago. It came in a sort of brief interlude and solo between more extensive performances. I take it that this part of the bill must have run something like this. Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. Though I cannot tell why it was exactly at those stage managers, the fates, put me down for a shabby part of a whaling voyage, when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies, and short and easy parts in genteel comedies, and jolly parts in farces. Though I cannot tell why this was exactly yet, now that I recall all the circumstances. I think that I can see a little into the springs and motives which began cunningly presented to me under various disguises, induced me to set about performing the part I did, besides cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bulk, and undeliverable nameless perils of the whale. Yet these, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps such things would not have been inducements, but as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch of the things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it, would they let me. Since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of the place one lodges in. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, two and two there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and in midmost of them all, one grand hooded phantom like a snow hill in the air. And that was chapter 1. That was more poetic than I was actually expecting. I am not a YouTube partner anymore, and this is now 15-minute long video. So, regardless of if I actually upload this or not, I'm going to end it here. Considering I had not seen some of those words before, I think it did a pretty good job. I've never read this book before, and I just find it easier to read while somehow recording myself. And we'll see how the book goes. I wasn't expecting him to have been a sailor teacher before becoming a sailor, though it does explain the flowery language. So I'm already liking this more than I thought I would, and I can't wait to read more. Moby Dick, Chapter 2, The Carpet Bag. I stuffed a shirt or two into my old carpet bag. I tucked it under my arm and started for Cape Horn in the Pacific. Quitting the good city of old Manhattan, I dully arrived in New Bedford. It was on a Saturday night in December. Much was I disappointed upon learning that the little packet for Nantucket had already sailed, and that no way of reaching the place would offer till the following Monday. As most young candidates for the pains and penalties of whaling stopped at this same New Bedford, hence to embark on their voyage, it may as well be related that I, for one, had no idea of doing so. For my mind was made up to sail in no other than a Nantucket craft, because there was a fine boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old islet, which amazingly pleased me. Besides, though New Bedford has of late been gradually monopolizing the business of whaling, and though in this matter poor old Nantucket is now much behind her, yet Nantucket was her great original, the tire of this Carthage, the place where the first dead American whale was stranded. Where else but from Nantucket did those aboriginal whalemen, the red men, first sally out in canoes to give chase to the Leviathan? And where but from Nantucket, too, did that first adventurous little sloop put forth partly laden with the imported cobblestones? So goes the story, to throw at the whales in order to discover when they were nigh enough to risk a harpoon from the bowsprit. Now having a night, a day, and still another night following before me in New Bedford, ere I could embark for my distant port, it became a matter of concernment where I was to eat and sleep. Meanwhile, it was a very dubious-looking, nay, a very dark and dismal night, bitingly cold and cheerless. I knew no one in the place. With anxious grapnels, I had sound in my pocket, and only brought up a few pieces of silver. So wherever you go, Ishmael, said I to myself as I stood in the middle of the dreary street shouldering my bag and comparing the gloom towards the north with the darkness towards the south. Wherever in your wisdom you may conclude to lodge for the night, my dear Ishmael, be sure to inquire the price and don't be too particular. With halting steps I paced the streets and passed the sign of the crossed harpoons, but it looked too expensive and jolly there. Further on, from the bright red windows of the Swordfish Inn, there came such fervent rays that it seemed to have melted the packed snow and ice from before the house, for everywhere else the congealed frost lay 10 inches thick in a hard asphaltic pavement, rather weary for me when I struck my foot against the flinty projections, because from hard remorseless service the soles of my boots were in the most miserable plight. Too expensive and jolly again, thought I, pausing one moment to watch the broad glare in the street and hear the sounds of the tinkling glasses within. But go on, Ishmael, said I at last. Don't you hear? Get away from before the door. Your patched boots are stomping the way. So on I went. Now by instinct followed the streets that took me waterward, for there, doubtless, were the cheapest, if not the cheeriest inns. Such dreary streets, blocks of blackness, not houses on either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. At this hour of the night of the last day of the week, that quarter of the town proved all but deserted. But presently I came to a smoky light proceeding from a low, wide building, the door of which stood invitingly open. It had a careless look, as if it were meant for the uses of the public. So, entering, the first thing I did was to stumble over an ash box in the porch. Ha, thought I, ha, as the flying particles almost choked me. Are these ashes from that destroyed city, Gomorrah? But the crossed harpoons and the swordfish, this, then, must be the sign of the trap. However, I picked myself up and, hearing a loud voice within, pushed on and opened a second interior door. It seemed the great black parliament sitting in a Tophet, which is valley south of Jerusalem, symbolic of hell. A 100 black faces turned round in their rows to peer, and beyond, a black angel of doom was beating a book in a pulpit. It was the old book. It was a Negro church. And the preacher's text was about the blackness of darkness, and the weeping and the wailing and the teeth gnashing there. Ha, Ishmael, muttered I, backing out. Wretched entertainment at the sign of the trap. Moving on, I at last came to a dim sort of out-hanging light not far from the docks, and heard a forlorn creaking in the air. And looking up, I saw a swinging sign over the door with a white painting upon it, faintly representing a tall, straight jet of misty spray, and these words underneath: the spouter in Peter Coffin. Coffin? Spouter. Rather ominous in that particular connection, thought I. But it is a common name in Nantucket, they say, and I suppose this Peter here is an emigrant from there. As the light looked so dim, and the place for the time looked quite enough, and the dilapidated little wooden house itself looked as if it might have been carted here from the ruins of some burnt district, and as the swinging sign had a poverty-stricken sort of creak to it, I thought that here was the very spot for cheap lodgings and the best of tea coffee. It was a queer sort of place, a gable-ended old house, one side palsied, as it were, and leaning over sadly. It stood on a sharp, bleak corner where the tempestuous wind, Euroclydon, kept up a worse howling than it ever did about poor Paul's tossed raft. Euroclydon, nevertheless, is a mighty pleasant zephyr to anyone indoors with his feet on the hob quietly toasting for bed. Euroclydon is wind that shipwrecked St. Paul. See the Bible, Acts 27. Okay. Indulging of that tempestuous wind called Euroclydon, said an old writer, of whose works I possess the only copy extant, it maketh a marvelous difference whether thou lookest out at it from a glass window where the frost is all on the outside, or whether thou observest it from that sashless window where the frost is on both sides, and of which the white death is only the glazier. True enough, thought I, that as this passage occurred to my mind, old black letter, thou reasonest well. Yes, these eyes are windows, and this body of mine is the house. What a pity they didn't stop they didn't stop up the chinks and the crannies, though, and thrust in a little lint here and there. But it's too late to make any improvements now. The universe is finished, the copestone is on, and the chips were carted off 1,000,000 years ago. Poor Lazarus there, chattering his teeth against the curbstone for his pillow and shaking off his tatters with his shiverings. He might plug up both ears with rags and put a corn cob into his mouth, and yet that would not keep out the tempestuous Euroclydon. Euroclydon, says old Dives in his red silken wrapper. He had a redder one afterwards. Pooh-pooh. What a fine frosty night, how Orion glitters, what northern lights. Let them talk of the Oriental summer climes of everlasting conservatories. Give me the privilege of making my own summer with my own coals. But what thinks Lazarus? Can he warm his blue hands by holding them up to the grand northern lights? Would not Lazarus rather be in Sumatra than here? Or would he not far rather lay him down lengthwise along the line of the equator? Yeah, ye gods, go down to the fiery pit itself in order to keep out this frost. Now that Lazarus should lie stranded there on the curbstone before the door of dives. This is more wonderful than that. An iceberg should be moored to one of the Lucas. Yet Dives himself, he too lives like a czar in an ice palace made of frozen sighs, and being a president of a temperance society, he only drinks the tepid tears of orphans. But no more of this blubbering now, and we are going a-whaling, and there is plenty of that yet to come. Let us scrape the ice from our frosted feet and see what sort of place this spouter may be. Okay. I knew Lazarus was brought back from the dead by Jesus in the Bible, though I'm not 100% sure if that whole passage is talking about before he was raised from the dead or after. And then Moluccas is also called the Spice Islands in the Malay archipelago. Archipelago. Well, we encountered some words that I would not have said if they were not in the book. I probably should have thought to expect that, considering how old this book is. It's 1800s era. I'm blanking on the specific year, but I do know that a lot of people didn't actually read this book when it first came out. And Herman Melville he did a lot of whaling. Very experienced with that stuff. And that most of his writing was actually autobiographical. But this is his only fiction book as far as I'm aware. And we're just going to have to accept that sometimes he uses words we don't use anymore, or shouldn't be using anymore. Because old 1800s man. Yeah. Chapter 3, The Spouter Inn. Entering that gable-ended spouter inn, you found yourself in a wide, low, straggling entry with old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. On one side hung a very large oil painting, so thoroughly besmoked and every way defaced that in the unequal crosslights by which you viewed it, it was only by diligent study and a series of systematic visits to it and careful inquiry of the neighbors that you could anyway arrive at an understanding of its purpose. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought some ambitious young artist in the time of the New England hags had endeavored to delineate chaos bewitched. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation and oft-repeated ponderings, and especially by throwing open the little window towards the back of the entry, you at last come to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not be altogether unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was a long, limber, portentous black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture over three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless yeast. A boggy, soggy, switchy picture, truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet was there a sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Ever and anon a bright, but alas, deceptive idea would dart you through. It's the Black Sea in a midnight gale. It's the unnatural combat of the four primal elements. It's a blasted heath. It's a Hyperborean winter scene. It's the breaking up of an icebound stream of time. But at last all these fancies yielded to that one portentous something in the picture's midst. That once found out, and all the rest were plain. But stop, does it not bear a faint resemblance to a gigantic fish, even the great Leviathan himself? In fact, the artist's design seemed this, a final theory of my own, partly based upon the aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed upon the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner in a great hurricane, the half-foundered ship weltering there with its 3 dismantled masts alone visible, and an exasperated whale purposing to spring clean over the craft is in the enormous act of impaling it himself upon the 3 mastheads. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. Some were thickly set with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws, others were tufted with knots of human hair, and one was sickle-shaped with a vast handle sweeping round like the segment made in the new mown grass by a long-armed mower. You shuddered as you gazed and wondered what monstrous cannibal and savage could ever have gone at death harvesting with such a hacking, horrifying implement. Mixed with these were rusty old whaling lances and harpoons all broken and deformed. Some were storied weapons. With this once long lance, now wildly elbowed, 50 years ago did Nathan Swain kill 15 whales between a sunrise and a sunset. And that harpoon, so like a corkscrew now, was flung in Javan seas and run away with by a whale, years afterwards slain off the Cape Blanco. The original iron entered nigh the tail, and like a restless needle suborning in the body of a man, traveled full 40 feet, and at last was found embedded in the hump. Crossing this dusky entry and on through yon low-arched way, cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney with fireplaces all round, you enter the public room. A still duskier place this, with such low ponderous beams above and such old wrinkled planks beneath, that you would almost fancy you trod some old craft's cockpits, especially of such a howling night, when this corner-anchored old ark rocked so furiously. On one side stood a long, low, shelf-like table covered with cracked glass cases, filled with dusty rarities gathered from this wide world's remotest nooks. Projecting from the further angle of the room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Be that how it may, there stands the vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide a coach might almost drive beneath it. Within are shabby shelves ranged around with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and in those jaws of swift destruction, like another cursed Jonah, by which name indeed they called him, bustles a little withered old man who, for their money, dearly sells the sailors deliriums and death. Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his poison, though true cylinders within the villainous green goggling glasses deceitfully tapered downwards to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pegged into the glass surround these footpads goblets. Fill to this mark and your charge is but a penny, to this a penny more, and so on to the full glass, the Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for a shilling. Upon entering the place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining a dim light diverse specimens of skirmshander, usually skimshaw, beams drawn on or objects carved from whalebone or teeth. grim chandeliers. Scenes drawn on or objects carved from real place or bone. I sought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with a room, received for answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But avast, he added, tapping his forehead, you hain't no objections to sharing a harpooner's blanket, have ye? I suppose you are a goin' a whalin', or so you'd better get used to that sort of thing. I told him that I never liked to sleep two in a bed, that if I should ever do so, it would depend who the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me, and the harpooner was not decidedly objectionable, why, rather than wander further down about a strange town on so bitter a night, I would put up with the half of any decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper'll be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle carved all over like a bench on the Battery, which is the southern tip of Manhattan in New York City. At one end, a illuminating tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at a ship under a full sail, but he didn't make much headway, I thought. At last, some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland, no fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and to hold our lips cups of scalding tea with our half-frozen fingers. But the fare was of the most substantial kind, not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heavens! Dumplings for supper! One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in the most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to a dead Sartanti? Sartainty. Sartanti. Landlord, I whispered, that ain't the harpooner, is it? Oh no, said he, looking a sort of diabolically funny. The harpooner is a dark-complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings, he eats nothing but steaks and likes 'em rare. The devil he does, says I. Where's that harpooner? Is he here? He'll be here afore long, was the answer. I could not help it, but I began to feel suspicious of this dark-complexioned harpooner. At any rate, I made up my mind that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, he must undress and get into bed before I did. I don't know what that means, but okay. Supper over, the company went back to the bar room when, knowing not what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently, a rioting noise was heard without. Starting up, with the landlord cried, "That's the Grampus's crew. That's the Grampus's crew. I seed her reported in the offing this morning, a 3 years' voyage in a full ship. Hurrah, boys! Now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A tramping of sea boots was heard in the entry. The door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch coats and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bedarned and ragged, and their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They had just landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder, then, that they made a straight wait for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled old Jonah, there officiating, soon poured them out brimmers all round. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all cold. Catars whatsoever. Never mind of how long standing or whether caught off the coast of Labrador or on the weather side of an ice island. Catars.